Today I want to talk about turbo carbureted application, specifically blow through turbo versus draw through turbo. And at first glance, both systems look pretty much the same. You have a turbocharger, you have a carburetor, you have an intake manifold, you have the exhaust going to the turbo, and then you have the turbo blowing back into the engine. At first glance, it all looks exactly the same, but there are a few key differences between one and the other one. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. First, I'm going to go ahead and explain what each system does and how it operates, and then we're going to go into the clashing differences. So a draw through turbo setup is exactly how it sounds. You have a turbocharger that draws its air charge through the carburetor and then feeds the motor directly. A blow through setup puts the turbocharger before the turbo, so the turbocharger blows its pressurized air into the carburetor. After it hits the carburetor, it goes into the engine. Now, a few of you might be asking, what's the actual difference? What does it matter if the turbocharger is before or after the carburetor? Is there really a difference? And the answer is yes. As you guys know, we can take an internal combustion engine and take the exhaust gases that escape from the engine, direct them into a turbine housing of a turbo that will spin the turbine, which will then spin the compressor wheel on the opposite side of the turbo. That will take the air coming into the turbo and pressurize it outside of the turbo. Now, depending on where that carburetor is, it's going to either pressurize air or it's going to pressurize air and fuel. So now let's break it down a little bit more. When the turbocharger is after the carburetor, the turbocharger sucks on a carburetor. What ends up happening is that the engine and turbo combination tend to act like if it was a bigger engine, which is to say that whatever the turbocharger air demands, the carburetor has to supply it. Now, if the turbocharger is before the carburetor, the air that is being supplied to the turbocharger is basically infinite. It has an infinite pool of air all around it. It is pressurizing that air, and then it takes that air and it pushes it through the carburetor. Once the carburetor is pressurized in a blow-through system, not only is the air going into the carburetor pressurized, the fuel is also being pressurized, which means that the boost pressure coming from the turbo is also helping push that fuel from the fuel bowls into the venturis and out of the carburetor. A big example of this is if you have, let's say you have a 5.7, 5.8 liter engine and you normally use a 650 CFM carburetor. Once you introduce the turbocharger in between the carburetor and the engine, you will no longer be able to run that 650 CFM carburetor because the 650 CFM carburetor becomes a restriction when it has to funnel the air going into the turbocharger. In a blow-through application, the turbocharger doesn't actually care what carburetor you have on your engine. So you'll still be able to take advantage of the smaller venturis and smaller throttle bores of a 650 carburetor, but it will be able to flow over twice as much air than it would if it was a draw-through application. So in order to get a draw-through application to function in the top end like a blow-through application, you have to increase the size of the carburetor to, let's say, 850 or 950 or 1000 CFM to get that air charge going into your 5.7, 5.8 liter engine. Where if it ran a 650 naturally aspirated, it's going to run a 650 under boost. There have been cases where a 650 CFM carburetor can be pushed past 1,000 horsepower without needing to be upgraded to 750 CFM. I've seen 750 CFM carburetors go up past 1,500 horsepower. That's another huge reason why it's very economical to build a blow-through turbocharged system, which makes a significant difference when trying to build, say, a budget stroker motor versus a budget turbo motor. You'll probably save 2 or 3 times more money sticking with a budget turbo system than you will with a stroker. Another drawback of the draw-through turbo system, not only do you need more air supplied to the turbo, the temperature of the air charge coming out of the turbocharger in a draw-through system is significantly higher than the temperature of a blow-through system. And the proper term for this is called charge cooling. When air enters a naturally aspirated carbureted engine, the air has to hit the venturis and the boosters. The air will then get mixed with the fuel of the carburetor. The fuel will actually absorb heat out of the air charge and in essence cool the air charge. The longer the runner, the more the air has a chance to cool down before it enters the combustion chamber. In a draw-through system, the air and fuel have already been mixed in the turbocharger. Arguably, you have a quote-unquote better mixture because the blades of the turbocharger are basically blending the air and fuel together. Once the air has been pressurized, there is no way for that temperature to go back down once it leaves the turbo. Obviously, you can run an intercooler with the draw-through setup, but then the next issue becomes that the air going into the intercooler, which also has fuel in it, now has to crash up against the core of the intercooler. If the intercooler is cooler than the air charge, the fuel will actually fall out of suspension and then stick itself to the inside core of the intercooler, causing problems with your mixture trying to head back into the intake manifold. Old school intake manifolds used to have a reed valve inside of the intake manifold where the carburetor would still be placed on top of the intake manifold, but then it would have a little trap door that it would open or close depending on whether or not you were under boost. If you were under boost, the trap door would open up and it would suck air from the carburetor and it would blow it back into the intake manifold. Once it was off of boost, the trap door would close and you would run with the carburetor right on top. The most notable of those systems was used by the Buick GNX in the early 80s, which was then later replaced with fuel injection. Another huge drawback of the draw-through turbo system is drivability. Like I mentioned before, factory turbocharged draw-through system use a special intake manifold that actually open trap doors in order to guide air. If you're making your own homemade system, making a trapdoor intake manifold is just not feasible. Carburetor right on top of the turbocharger may be the easiest way to do it, but the issues arise when the carburetor is so far away from the intake manifold, or worse yet, that the carburetor is under a different plane than the intake manifold. There's no way to get fuel from the carburetor into the motor with low airspeed or no airspeed. Cold starts with the draw-through system are much harder than they are with a blow-through system. A lot of draw-through turbo cars that have their carburetor set too low in reference to the intake manifold have problems starting and have to be started up with either a lot of pumps through the accelerator pump or with the use of either or starting fluid, which is another hassle. Even though you get the system running, it still does not tend to run 100%. Like I mentioned, with low air speeds, like low RPMs, you might not be able to get that mixture to the intake manifold well enough, and you are going to suffer a little bit in the drivability standpoint. Although the blow-through system in most intents and purposes is the superior system, there are some positives to the draw-through system. The number one being that the tuning process of a draw-through turbo system is very similar to the tuning process of tuning, let's say, a big cubic inch, big horsepower motor, versus trying to tune a blow-through system, which involves using boost activated power valves and playing with the jetting and staggering the power valve opening points. And there's a lot of things that go into tuning a blow-through carbureted system that the average person just does not want to deal with. So a draw-through system, especially in the Volkswagen world, is still very popular among enthusiasts. Even with that benefit, in my eyes, the blow-through system is significantly better than the draw-through system, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher, out.